This is module number 11, setting up trend graphs and scorecards. Your managers and executives need analytics-enabled dashboards. They need to be able to measure performance and productivity. In order to do that, you want to leverage reports, saved searches, and custom metrics to give them the data they need for insight. You want to expose trend graphs in dedicated portlets to give them visual representation of data. In this module, we're going to examine how to display critical data in trend graphs and how to dive deeper into your data by creating KPI scorecards. A KPI scorecard allows comparison across multiple time segments. You can delve deeper by comparing one KPI to another, and you can create complex Excel-like formulas to expose the data that you need. Our objectives for this module: set up and use trend graphs, display standard and custom trend graphs on dashboards, and enable and build a KPI scorecard. Well, what is a trend graph? A trend graph provides visual presentation of key metrics over time. You can add a trend graph to most standard dashboards. You can add up to 5 to the home dashboard. You can place trend graphs on most standard center tabs, such as transactions, opportunities. You may be able to put some trend graphs on any of your custom tabs as well. You cannot add tabs that are not used as standard dashboards, such as activities, documents, setup, and customization. Let's do a walkthrough. I'll show you how to add some trend graphs to the home dashboard and how to set up some standard and custom trend graph portlets. Let's start by adding a trend graph portlet to the dashboard. We'll start by personalizing the dashboard, moving over to the trend graph option, and clicking on a trend graph portlet. I have one on screen here to start with. When you've completed, close that option. To set up your trend graph, on the highlight bar, go over to where it has the 3 lines and click on the Setup option. You can define what type of chart it will be, what your KPI is, both standard or custom, what your trend type is, a moving average line if you want to see if your peaks and valleys are reasonable, how many periods to calculate that moving average? Do you want to show a last data point or a first data point? What type of theme would you like? If you have a custom color, a hexadecimal color, you can enter it here. And what is your background type you'd like to use? I'll save. This is now my trend graph. There are my bands. There's that standard color we chose. The dotted blue line is our moving average line, so I can see if peaks and valleys are reasonable. I can choose what type of graph I want. I can choose the time frames and have those dynamically change. Returning back to our setup, I can now export or download it to a PNG image, a JPEG, a PDF document, or a vector image. So I can leverage this graphic to use in other applications. Let's review. Adding trend graphs to the home dashboard, you click on the personalized link for the dashboard. You can add up to 5 trend graph portlets. You can also select custom KPI trend graphs as well, based on saved searches. Now note that saved search can only display by date. It cannot display based on period. You can only display that particular one based on a dashboard that includes a KPI portlet. Repeat the same steps to add trend graphs to other dashboards. To set up the portlet, you can choose the default chart type, trend type, the moving average to determine if the numbers are reasonable, your peaks and your valleys. How many periods to calculate that moving average? Do you want to hide or show last data point? Maybe you want to hide it if it's an incomplete period. Do you want to exclude or include 0 on the y-axis? What type of chart theme do you like? What's the color series? If it's a custom color series, do you have a hexadecimal value to use? And what is the background type you'd like? If it's a custom trend graph, you can select the search, which is most appropriate, to be able to give you those graphics. You will then define other attributes, very similar to what you did with the standard trend graph portlet. Let's move on to KPI scorecards. KPI scorecards are going to allow you to obtain complex and in-depth trend analysis. This will help you and your executives and your managers to gauge the health of your business. How are you doing now and compared to other periods of time? Examples. You want to track the profit performance of your services division on a monthly, quarterly, and annual basis. You want to monitor the sales revenue generated across your various offices, across your various locations, subsidiaries, whatever your value is. Calculate the ratio of cost of goods to revenue over multiple periods. Definitely an indicator of the health of your business. Determine how traffic is moving through your NetSuite website and how it varies throughout the years, how holidays and seasons might be impacting your traffic. Or analyzing website conversion rates. Have a formula which subtracts new customers from unique visitors and have that expressed as a percentage. These are a few samples of things you can put on a KPI scorecard. Going to do a walkthrough now. I'm going to show you where to enable the feature and how to determine requirements for your KPIs on your scorecard. Let's first enable the feature. We're going to go into Setup, Company, and Enable Features. On the Analytics subtab, we're going to verify that KPI scorecards are set up. It's a one-time feature setup, and once it's established, based on your roles and permissions, it will be available for you to use. Click Save when you are completed. Now let's think about what kinds of things we would want to have in our KPI scorecard. I'm going to go to Help for some answers there. I'm going to look up Standard KPI and see what I see. To make my search more specific, I changed it to Standard Key Performance, and now I see a Standard Key Performance Indicators table. This is a listing of every standard key performance indicator available out of the box, provided the feature is enabled and provided you have permissions to work with it. Okay? So you can take a look at the KPI, a description of what it means, and the report that KPI comes from. Now, after you've gone through this list, you'll need to determine, is this enough information? Or perhaps do you need some custom KPIs as well? To review, we went into Setup, Company Enable Features, to the Analytics subtab, and validated that KPI Scorecards was enabled. We went into Help, and we looked up the Standard Key Performance Indicators table, giving you a listing of the standard out-of-the-box KPIs, a description of what they are, and what report generates that KPI result. If you have everything you need, you're fine. If you don't, you may want to consider building custom KPIs as needed. Now we're going to do a variety of things to set up our KPI scorecard. We're going to select periods or dates. We may add some custom KPIs and standard KPIs, set up some attributes along the way, add a formula, take a look at some date range or periods, look at highlighting options, and save and display the KPI scorecard. Let's take a look at an example of a KPI scorecard. This one's called Board Metrics. And I'm using custom KPIs for this. To do that, I go into the Custom KPI tab, and I select my custom KPIs. They are labeled between 1 and 10. So I have two. I created one called Revenue Target All and one called Revenue All. Then I go back to select my KPIs. In the first row, I'm selecting Custom KPI 1, Custom KPI 2, and then comparing KPI 2 to 1 using a variance percent. You have choices you can make. And I'm calling that percent of board plan. So not only am I providing the numbers, I'm doing some calculations for them. For the date ranges, because I did not select accounting periods, it's letting me choose actual months: January, February, March, last quarter. Had I chosen periods, you would have seen the familiar this period, this quarter, last quarter. That's a selection that you make, and once you save the KPI scorecard, you cannot change it. If you made a mistake, you would need to delete the scorecard and reinitialize with the box checked or unchecked appropriately. So we've talked about KPIs, date ranges, and custom. Highlighting. You can actually add a formula. So in this case, I'm saying if the percent of board plan is greater than 50%, I want to see it a certain color. And the color I chose was this dark green. And I said bold it. Now when I save, you will see my KPI scorecard in its portlet. Set up, select your KPI scorecard. There are my indicators. There is my board plan, the above 50%. There's my greens. I can also do trend graphs as needed. We've now set up and worked with a KPI scorecard. To first create a scorecard from scratch, you can do so from Customizations, Centers and Tabs, KPI Scorecards, and New. If you want to edit an existing scorecard, you can click on KPI Scorecards and get a listing and select. Name the scorecard. That becomes the title of the KPI scorecard portlet when you select it, and enter an optional description as needed. A major choice you need to make is, are you using periods, January, April, July, August? Are you using dates, or are you using periods? If you're using periods, you will check the box and you'll see first quarter, last quarter, your traditional accounting style periods. If you uncheck the box, you will see date ranges. If you have custom KPIs, you need to go to the separate subtab and add them in from custom KPI 1 through custom KPI 10. Using periods is not an option for custom KPIs. Adding a standard KPI, you go to the row, you select from the drop-down your standard KPI. You can also choose your custom KPIs from 1 through 10 that you previously did in the last step. You can add in formulas or calculations. In this case, there's a formula percent, and it's between opportunities won and opportunities lost. Do note that for KPIs, they are all uppercase. In our previous modules, we worked with searches. Fields are lowercase. You cannot mix them. So in this case, we're working on a KPI scorecard. Everything will need to be capitalized. When you add your formula in, it's very similar to the formulas we did with searches. You'll use the set formula icon. You'll choose the required KPI or KPIs. If you need to use a SQL function, you can do that as well. Click on Set to return to the rest of your formula creation. You might want to hide a formula. Your project manager is paid a bonus for keeping the ratio of cases logged to sales made below a certain level. The KPI scorecard contains a formula to calculate that ratio, and a second formula determines his bonus. You don't need to see the calculation, so you can hide it, but the formula is still available for a later calculation. For highlighting, when you're creating a new scorecard or editing, you can set up highlighting. It makes the results more visible. You select the KPI and determine what the highlighting conditions are and what colors, background, bold that you would like to use. Save and display the scorecard. You can add it to your portlet. You could do restrictions as necessary, determine the orientation. Do you want the KPIs from north to south? Do you want them across the top? You can flip date range and your KPIs. Do you want to show the trend graph icon? And do you actually want to show a physical date row with corresponding dates? Best practices. Define multiple scorecards, knowing you can only display one at a time, but you may have different use cases, or you may have different people that need to run scorecards. Ensure your KPI scorecard has enough of the required data. Talk to your managers and executives and ask them what they need to see. Make sure you're comparing like-kind KPIs. If you're comparing something like your product line revenue to your management fees, there might not be a relevance there that is meaningful for a KPI scorecard. You don't need to choose the same KPIs, and if you don't want a comparison result to display on the scorecard, check the hidden box. Remember the bonus calculation display we talked about earlier. Your turn for exercise. There are 3 of them. Display a custom KPI as a trend graph. Use standard KPIs to create a KPI scorecard, and compare multiple KPIs in a scorecard. And when you've completed these exercises, you will have completed module number 11. This concludes this module.